All right, we're live. So thanks for coming out, everybody. Welcome to Horizontal DevOps. This is maybe the most enigmatic session title, but we're going to be talking about a lot of cool stuff today. My name is Rob Bayliss. I'm the CTO at Last Call Media. I do a lot of work with teams and making sure that everyone has the tools that they need in order to deploy confidently and do their development without breaking things. We work on a lot of sort of like high traffic sites. Right now I'm working with mass.gov and I'm sort of over there for the time being. This is Geoff.
Hi, Geoff St. Pierre. I work at Tandem and we make Lando, which is a local development solution based on Docker. I like to contribute to open source projects like Lando, Backdrop, Drupal, Drush. And similar to Last Call, we work on some high traffic sites and we have lots of DevOps considerations and lots of different projects going on.
Cool. So this session is titled Horizontal DevOps, and I want to dive into that for a second because that's a little bit of a confusing title. So horizontal DevOps, as we're talking about it today, is in contrast to like traditional DevOps, where you've got kind of your single vertical silo. In traditional DevOps, you're building that yellow brick road to production. So you want to be able to send your code on its merry way and have it go to production without issue. So that's all well and good, but what if you need to do that for like, I don't know, 20 projects, 30 projects, 40 projects?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do here when we think about horizontal DevOps is scale out our teams across these multiple projects and our tools. So make it easy to go from one project to another. Context switching is hard. We're trying to make that as simple and seamless as possible.
Right. And when we say DevOps in this context, what we're talking about is both the tooling on the developer side, the process of going to production, the testing, sort of all of that stuff. And where we come from, we both come from an agency background, which is, you may be managing many projects at once. So this topic is definitely near and dear to our hearts. So, yeah, right. How do you manage all these projects without one crashing onto another? Like, how do you manage two projects running simultaneously where at any point one project could like cause your attention to get completely diverted over to that one? There are some issues with like horizontal, like scaling DevOps across many projects. And there's some real tension in the stakeholder, like how people look at this.
Yeah, so we have different users with different needs, different stakeholders, different needs. So, we have budgets and developers that want to try new things per project, and then, new tools and new, like Webpack and things like that. And then the DevOps people typically want uniformity so that we can manage all the projects, and if something goes down and they call the DevOps team, we know what to do. So this is about a balance of those things and trying to keep all these stakeholders happy.
Right, and this is especially challenging in like a situation where you have many projects going on. These problems aren't unique to agencies or companies that run a lot of projects, but they're certainly made worse when you have 10 different stakeholders that all have their own idea of what needs to be the budget and the priorities of each project. So how do we, Geoff and I manage it? And obviously we work at two different companies, so we have different approaches, and we're gonna kind of dive into those in just a second. Why don't you kick it off, Geoff, with Lando?
Sure. So one of our primary tools at Tandem is Lando that helps us scale across these projects in a uniform way. So Lando is a local development solution that's based on Docker. So we get all of our projects into this tool that helps us interact with these projects in a very similar way. And we can pass the whole stack off to another developer and ramp up a new developer, or steal someone who has some bandwidth from another team on a project for a few tasks, that kind of thing. So that's our goal behind Lando, is to get people up on projects quickly and easily and be productive. So I can't see that, but I think what I'm doing here is Lando init. So we're trying to follow this pattern like that you'll see, like, you know, git init, start up a project. So
yeah, it's really small.
it's going to prompt you for some stuff. You could give the app a name. So this is if you have if you're starting a project from scratch, you're going to initialize the project. And you run this Lando init command. It's going to ask you some questions. What kind of project is it? And I don't know if you can see the selection of the project. So I think we're choosing Drupal 8 here, but there's some other choices there that so if you're working on WordPress or Laravel, you can choose those projects. You can spin your own generic PHP or Node.js apps. But if you want to use a recipe, you can select these things. If you go to the next slide, Rob, the result of this Lando init, similar to a git init, it makes your .git file and folder with your config in there. What you get here is a .lando.yaml file. And what we recommend is that you commit that to the repo so that developers, when they pull down the repo, have this, and they're going to get the same setup that you were stating as canonical for the project. So what you got here is a very simple YAML file, just as the name, the recipe you're using, and telling it where to serve the project from. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So your next step here would be Lando start, and this is going to spin up all the Docker containers and get your project going. So this is a Drupal 8 project, so Lando's like, you're going to want Drush, you're going to want Drupal console, so it's getting those things for you. It gives you a nice little URL, so you can go to your project and start viewing it and developing on it. So this is an example of what Rob and I were calling well-named.lando.yaml file, because you can go crazy. The sky's the limit. You can do anything you can do in Docker Compose. So as opposed to the first slide, which is basically a recipe and where's the app coming from, this one has some examples of. So you can see you can your config. It's a Drupal 8 recipe, and it's via Nginx, so you can swap out Nginx or Apache. The idea is to have parity with your with whatever you're using on production. So if you're using like platform.sh or Pantheon, you probably want Nginx. If you pop it out of the slideshow, would it be bigger? Would it be?
Well, there are two projectors, so you can double it up, but I don't think you can make the one projector image larger. We can have it appear on both sides.
Sure. How about doing?
Yeah, you select the other projector and then you tell it to use the same source as the first projector.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. We apologize for the size of these. These slides will be available online after this, so if anyone is interested in taking a closer look,
yeah,
it'll be there.
So you can have parity with your web server. If you're using Apache or Nginx, you can do that. You can choose your PHP version if it's a PHP app. Drupal's PHP, so you can choose 7.1, 7.2, backwards to 5.3. I don't think you can run Drupal 8 on that. You can run, if you have a legacy Drupal 6 app, PHP 5.3, you can use that. You can tell it what kind of database backend you want. Do you want MySQL? Do you want Postgres? In this case, we got MariaDB. You can add different services to the container. So in this case, in the app server, we're loading in Platform SH's CLI tool so that we can interact with the server and get databases easily and stuff like that. And then beneath the services, down at the tooling section, we're exposing this platform command to the user as part of the menu so that Lando knows. If somebody types Lando platform, they're going to call this command here. So you can easily load in whatever tools you want. So that's just an example of one tool you can load in. If you go to this link down here, you can see a fully fleshed out documented example with more tools. And so, for example, you could put PHP unit in there or things like that. So this is one example of putting one piece of tooling into Lando. And then by extension, all of your developers that work on this project have the same things.
How is it for, you mentioned PHP, how is it for loading, say, different PHP modules? If you have, say, a list of 15 of them that you wanted in there.
Yeah, so we have a pretty close parity with Pantheon if you use the Pantheon recipe. If you if you want to load in something that's not there, there's a conf key, and you can have an INI file with whatever you want in it. And then if you, under the conf key, tell it about that file, when it builds the container, it loads that stuff in. So you can customize anything that's available, you can put in there.
I think it's probably also worth mentioning that this is all built on Docker Compose. So anything you can do in Docker, you can do in Lando.
Oh, that's actually pretty expensive.
Yeah. So what is this one?
Tooling.
So this is just running, so if you just run Lando with no arguments, you can get a list of what tools you have available to you. So we have a DB import and a DB export, so you can put data in, take data out. The platform command would be exposed. It's not exposed in this one because that's not the Lando.yaml file that's behind the scenes. But if you were using that, the platform would be exposed as a command here that you could use. And the point here is just that you can see what's available to you by just typing Lando.
Cool. So I think the point here is that this is a set of tooling that Tandem uses across all of their projects. They have a similar sort of setup for it. Every project has its own Lando.yaml, which is going to mirror production, whatever production looks like. So it really allows a lot of flexibility there. On the Last Call Media side, we went another direction with it to sort of bring feature parity across all our projects. We ended up implementing kind of like a scaffold repo, which is basically just a bare install of Drupal 8. This would be for any of our Drupal 8 projects. And this is where we start from. So it sort of bundles all this stuff together, and that stuff is like our common Circle CI build, some common deployment stuff for Pantheon. So like every project gets deployment markers when we go out to New Relic or whatever. And so we've packaged all this stuff together. On the setup end, these are the instructions. Kind of readable, I guess, but basically you clone it down. We're using pretty standard tools here. We're using Docker Compose, Composer, and Yarn for our 3 different sort of layers. You've got Docker Compose, which we provide a Docker Compose file, which basically serves like our Lando file to define the environment for the project. And if that were to change, let's say one project needs to mirror Acquia or some other host, we're able to do that on a per project basis. And the way that the developer interacts with it doesn't change. They still use Docker Compose. And then, of course, Composer and Yarn for package management on our projects. And then we've recently introduced Composer site import command, which allows our developers to get a snapshot of like a sanitized production database for local use in development. And so these commands are not going to change between our projects, no matter where they're hosted, no matter where they're, like what the project requires. This is a little tough to read, but this is a section of Composer JSON, and this is the script section. So this is where we define some common tasks for all of our projects. We have things like, what does the asset building process look like for this project? We have a top-level build command. So you run Composer build, and it goes through whatever the asset compilation process is for this project. Same with link test and site import. Those mean those are invoked the same way across all our projects, even though they may do different things under the hood. And then a huge component of this for us is our Circle CI build. How many people, does everyone in here know what continuous integration is? Kind of? Okay. So continuous integration is when you push your code to your repository. Continuous integration is the bit that takes it and does tests to make sure that everything is integrating well. It can also handle deployment of your code out to different environments. So for example, in Drupal 8, where we like to not have all of the vendor code built into the repository, what it does for us is it pulls in all that code and then packages it up and ships it off as like a fully built archive. So it's almost like a compiled situation. And so this process is going to also be shared amongst our projects. We have 3 phases that we go through: build, test, and deploy. And this screenshot looks a little scary because you can see that test failed and deploy still happened. But in this case, we're deploying to Pantheon, and the way things are set up, this actually doesn't push out to production. This would be like to a feature environment where we're able to manually test it. So that's not a problem here. So I think it sort of like bears asking, why did we pick the tools that we picked? I know that on the LCM side, we had a real need to spin up Drupal 8 sites quickly, and we needed a complex workflow around the testing and the deployment process. That's why we ended up going with the Scaffold route as opposed to something like Lando. Why did you guys end up going with Lando?
Well, we make Lando, so we're eating our own dog food. But why do we make Lando is for the exact same reasons that Rob mentioned, so that we can easily spin up projects, integrate with all these different services, Travis and Circle and whatever, integrating with all these things.
Yep. Cool. So, every agency, every company is going to have a slightly different approach to this. Everyone's going to end up with different tools. The tooling actually isn't so important. The message that we kind of want to say here is that it's not important what you end up with. It's important that you're thinking about this and building a process. So you really need to be making conscious choices about your DevOps stack and the tools that you choose and also the process that you use. So we're going to go through some guidelines that we think people should be aware of as they bring good DevOps practice to their organization. So especially when you're talking about like this idea of horizontal DevOps, where you're moving from project to project to project, you're going to want to make success repeatable and be able to bring that to new projects. Geoff, you want to talk about the semantic versioning?
Yeah. So one thing that you want to do is treat your DevOps products as an open source project, even if it's not an open source project. Use that kind of paradigm. So version your software releases, even if that's a private GitHub repo. In our case, that's Lando. So make a 1.0.0 release, and then when you go from 1.0 to 1.0.1, that's a bug fix release where you're not going to break anything for your developers. You don't have to notify them. Documentation changes are probably minor, just saying what's been updated. And then when you go from 1.0 to 1.1, you're adding features. So this is how semantic versioning works. But those features shouldn't break your API. So your developers shouldn't have to change. They should just get new things that can make their lives easier. And then when you go from 1.0 to 2.0, things might change. So by using this semantic version, which is a well-known system, you're just leveraging it for your internal products that are going to help you scale and help you your users, your developers, be productive. So they can know just by the version number. They can still talk to you, that's fine, but the version number is conveying information to them like, hey, if we went from 1.0 to 2.0, well, I better check out the README and see what's going on. What do I need to know?
Right, and I think this applies to, just to give a concrete example here, let's say your organization has a shell script that does something that you want to be able to do across many projects. I think something as simple as a shell script can benefit from this level of like organization. You don't have to be super regimented about it, but do try to apply the concepts of semantic versioning to that. The other bit here, so let's say that shell script gets updated. How do you push that out to all of your different projects? And we like to advocate for the use of package managers. So both Composer and NPM have ways of specifying private packages. So like when you pull in that shell script, don't copy and paste it. Actually find a way to get it onto Composer or NPM and then use that to distribute it out. And then your semantic versioning can actually apply very well. As you update that package in the future, you're able to pull it into all your different different projects and take advantage of the new stuff. That's pretty exciting. And then, yeah, of course, keep your documentation up to date. I think this is easier said than done, and we'll cover it in a little more depth later. But it is very important to make sure that people know how to use these different bits and pieces that you're building. And then finally, defining and sharing your release workflow for every tool. So back to that example of the shell script, even if it's as simple as a shell script, have like a list of steps that say, all right, when you update this, consider whether it's a minor, major, whatever release, and these are the things that you need to cover for release. That doesn't need to be unique to every project. So that shell script might share the release process with 10 other projects. Just be aware that that release process is something that can block your organization from updating those shared pieces in the future, and just try to build some documentation around it.
I give a shout out to Drush release notes command, which I think the commerce people make. His name is escaping me, but if you're a Drupal developer and you drush RN on any Git repo, you can generate a markdown file of the commits, and then you can go in there and edit that file to give value to your clients. This is what's changed in this release of your application, and so they can see the value that went into that dev cycle. Yeah,
and I think release notes are definitely a whole topic unto themselves as well.
Yeah, but so you could do that on your DevOps tool.
Yep.
And you can do that on your client projects, and that helps. Because documentation can be hard and easy to skip, so that's Drush RN is a nice way to not skip it, in my mind.
Right. So this is a little more abstract. So thinking in interfaces, I think this is a really important point to grasp. And so the definition of an interface is up there. It's basically where two different systems interact with each other. And in programming, we know this concept pretty well. You've got an interface which defines like the integration points, the API. So the same thing can apply to many different things. For example, the way that developers interact with your project, with each project, could be considered an interface. So in the example of Lando, Lando provides Lando start, Lando init, whatever. Those commands are not going to change from project to project. So that provides a really nice way for developers at Tandem to stay up to date with what's going on without needing a ton of documentation for each project. So if you're thinking in interfaces, you're considering, where your developers, stakeholders, and clients are interacting with the individual projects, and you're trying not to change that, or if you do change it, being aware that you need to note that and call it out. It becomes a breaking change when you, let's say, change Lando start to something else. That's probably not going to happen, but yeah, so just documenting what your interface is and being aware of when it's changing is the important point here. And obviously the goal is to make onboarding to new projects and starting new projects more seamless. Is there more you wanted to say about this one, or that
No, I think that
covers it?
Don't break stuff on developers.
Yep. So the other thing, obviously, DevOps is a complicated thing. It can be something that requires a lot of time and frankly, money to implement well. The long-term benefit here is, there's potentially increases in efficiency, developer happiness. Your agency may becomes good enough at it that it's able to get like work on the basis of your DevOps stuff. That certainly happened with both of our organizations, and it's a very real benefit. Yeah, I think the other important thing here is you're trying to increase the confidence that you can take on projects with. And if you know that you have a consistent process that allows for things like testing and fast deployment, you're a lot more able to take on big projects and deliver on those projects. So it increases your likelihood of success.
I guess I would say it helps optimize your team too. Like if you have a very good CSS developer or a junior developer who can add value to a project by making a CSS change, when they go, this pipeline is set up, they go to deploy the same way as everyone else. If they did something they shouldn't have, it's going to be caught by these mechanisms that you spent the time to set up and use across your projects. So you're getting more value out of your developers and delivering more value.
Right. Yeah, so differences should be intentional. As we mentioned earlier, DevOps in like an agency setting has this tendency to want everything to be uniform. And that's not realistic. Our projects aren't going to be all the same shape and size. Some of them are going to be hosted in different places. Some of them are going to be on completely different technologies. I think that we have to recognize that those differences are going to happen and strive to minimize them where we can, but we need to make those divergences intentional. Make them something that you think about, like, are we going to choose Drupal or WordPress for this project? Obviously, the answer there is Drupal, but like, know why you're doing that. So yeah, and I think this applies even on a smaller scale to like things like your asset build pipeline. Are you going to choose Gulp or whatever? And it goes back to this idea of interfaces. If your developer's interface to the project is Composer build or Lando start, and the asset compilation happens behind the scenes, then it doesn't so much matter what the actual asset pipeline looks like. The developer's sort of like interface with it is going to stay the same. And so these differences do cost money, but sometimes they can be worth it.
Yep. So what we do at Tandem is we say that to the client, you want Elasticsearch, that's fine. It's going to take us, X to build that out, hook it up, and make it happen, put it into the project. And sometimes the answer to that question is, yeah, we need that, we want that. That's going to provide value to our end users. So do that. Let's put that as part of the project budget. And then, so what we want is our DevOps stack is have the flexibility to be able to put that in without refactoring the entire stack. So that's what we're after in terms of DevOps. And we know there's cost to it, and we just want to be honest about whether that cost is worth it or not. And sometimes the answer is yes.
All right, yeah, and so this sort of follows onto that. Don't be dogmatic. Don't stick with the processes that you have just for the sake of having them. You need to keep thinking about what processes you're working with and whether they're still providing value. Documentation, right? You want to take this one?
Documentation is critical, and it's easy to skip. My recommendation, I think our recommendation is don't do that. It's because it'll just come back to bite you when a project that you haven't touched in a year, they have some emergency request that's not documented. If that developer that made it is sick that day, you're just kind of stuck. So document it so other people can get spun up on the project. We have links here to different documentation. So our company documentation, our processes are public. You can make pull requests against it, and this is a I encourage this process. I think you should do that as your company. You don't have to, but like other companies are doing this as well. Pantheon, platform.sh. And I think there's value in it. We'll even get pull requests like, hey, you have a typo here. And so you can leverage this documentation to be a map for how your company documentation could or should be, or just take the idea of maybe making your documentation public.
And one way of making documentation a little less onerous is layering it like this. You have your company documentation that provides like the general overview of how every project is going to be. And then you can, if you have your company documentation and your tool documentation, and there aren't that many differences between your projects, then the projects probably don't need like, you know, a 600-word essay on exactly how to use it. Maybe it can just be a link to your standard project flow and then an outline of what's different on this project to watch out for. Cool. Yeah, pick good partners. As DevOps people, we end up doing a lot of integrations and using a lot of services. Yeah, I'll let you run.
Yeah, so these are partners that we're confident recommending that we work with successfully, and they make our lives easier. They do the containerization in production for us. So we have all our, and we try to mirror these local development environments after these. We don't always get to pick who is our host, but these are some good partners for us. That they don't have to be the same partners for you, but intentionally pick partners that are going to make your lives easier when possible.
Right. And I think this applies to all sorts of things. You know, we do end up getting to make recommendations a lot of times, and to clients. Clients are responsible in most cases for picking which partner they're going to go with for things like hosting and monitoring and that kind of thing. But where you have the ability to recommend someone that your company works well with and that you know is an effective partner, go for it, because it's just going to make your process faster. All right, and then finally, we're going to continuously reevaluate. You need to make sure that you're killing your darlings, as they say. So don't hang on to something just because you built it. So DevOps is about building these feedback loops. Your needs are going to change over time, and you need to really think through how you're going to measure success in the future. So you implement, let's say, that shell script, and you're like, great, awesome, working well. How are you going to figure out if there's a better solution out there, or if you even need to look for a better solution 6 months down the road? And I think that monitoring and sort of like evaluation is a critical bit of this. And it's something that we maybe haven't thought about as much as we should in this presentation, but definitely you need to make sure that you have a way to monitor success across your projects. And so whether that means like checking for build failures, are you seeing a common source of build failures on all of your projects? And maybe that indicates that something is not working as well. That would be a good opportunity to either fix it or switch something else in. So yeah, it's just very important that you stay on top of the technologies that you're using and whatever project or process you're sharing between these projects.
So I guess I would add that, like, as people, you should iterate on your mental cycles, and documentation should be flexible living. It should be iterated on as well. It shouldn't be considered fixed in stone. So all of these things should be flexible, and then you just change the documentation if your process is discovered to be broken in some way or at some piece. Change it out, document it, iterate on it.
Cool. And that's it. Does anyone have questions at this point? Mike.
Yeah. So it seems for both Panda and Laptop Media, you kind of took some pre-built solutions and then build your own on top of them? Was there a reason why you decided to like build your own or not try to go all with what already exists and make it work for you?
Yep. I think that's probably two separate answers. I can certainly take the last call one, which I would say that the intention of our Drupal scaffold is to leverage as many of those outside tools as we can. And it's just sort of the glue that binds them all together. So it's like the PHP CS configuration. PHP CS is a linting tool for PHP code, but we want to share a common configuration for all our projects. So that goes in the scaffold. But we're still using all sorts of external tools. It's mainly the configurations for those tools where we're putting them in our own code. And I want to give Geoff a chance to answer.
It's a very similar answer. We're just trying to package our tooling in a way that we can move side to side to different developers. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with Lando. And we have to work with WordPress and Laravel and some node stacks. So we can't focus on what works perfectly in Drupal 8 all the time. So we have to be flexible enough to have those different projects be in Lando. And Lando is the version 3 of Calabox. So we've been discovering this over 5 or 6 years. So before the original Calabox was built on top of Vagrant, and now we're on top of Docker. So we've learned a lot of lessons in trying to make this tool go out sideways to our developers and give everybody the same stack, and hopefully mirror production as close as possible. So that was our motivation.
I would also just plug Lando in the sense that Lando is a lot more usable than bare Docker Compose. Docker Compose can be a lot to type for new developers. And so I think like where you guys extended it, it does make sense. And you are building on Docker Compose as well.
That's right.
So.
I work with mostly Linux servers on VMs and use Ansible to build those. Is there a way to take something like an Ansible build that you would use for what you might think of as a traditional server build for Drupal box or something like that, and translate that into a local dev environment for the developers in Lando? How would you mimic that so as you make changes to your server, it would update the way that Lando works?
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And that would be using Docker in production would probably be the best way to do that. And in that case, you're actually deploying your Docker containers. What you work on locally is what you deploy. We, I think I could say both of our companies, but definitely Tandem, we escape that problem by choosing a partner like platform.sh who has containerization in production already. So our local containers are mirroring that, and then we deploy out to them, and their containers take over at that point. So your workflow is certainly possible. You would actually deploy the Docker containers. You wouldn't use Lando for that. We don't recommend. We don't say that our containers are production ready, and we don't expect you to put them in production. We expect you to use them as a local development platform. So yes, you can do that thing. Deploy your containers, your local containers directly to production. Not with Lando though.
Got it.
I would also say you could keep production the way it is and just use Docker to build images that mirror it based on your Ansible playbooks. So like build those containers, and then there's going to be some step there where you have to use environment variables or something like that to get the specific settings for the container. But
yeah,
I think it's possible.
It seems ideal. I don't think we're likely to change the production environment that much, but to have a way that we can get that back out to developer companies like yourself so that you could mirror what our environment is.
Totally.
Yeah, so if you translated the Ansible file to a Docker Compose file, you could spin that up in Lando or in bare Docker.
I would even, I mean, I'm thinking like a Docker file. So build one image that is your web server that runs Ansible and will compile, and then that image can be tagged with each release of your Ansible playbooks. So I don't know. That's how I would go about it.
Thank you.
Clever. I like it.
Yep.
Wondering sort of who owns the tools within an organization. So just very quickly talked about planning, making sure you're getting value, documentation, working with stakeholders, a lot of things that a product would often have, product owner or a producer or some sort of client-facing role. Who fills that role when it's internal value you're creating? And it's also very technical.
Yeah.
You know,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think we as DevOps people do because it matters to us. We need to create those tools and also document them so that they can be used. And I think the more effective we are at that, the less work, say, a developer is going to need to do to understand what's going on under the hood, and the less time we're going to have to spend explaining people through it. So I think it definitely falls on the DevOps people.
Yeah, one thing I would say about that is if you don't have a DevOps team, considering.
I think that's what I was getting at.
Yeah,
right.
So I would say
businesses that are like on the edge and
Sure.
wondering, seeing the value.
And to be
Not
clear, I
full-time DevOps.
don't think either of us has a full-time DevOps person on our team.
No, what we have is a acknowledgement that there is a DevOps team, and we have, per project, it might be me and another developer, or 3 developers, or 4 developers, depending on the project, but we acknowledge that we need a DevOps team and we need an owner on that. So for every project, we're not ignoring DevOps. So if you don't have a DevOps team, it doesn't mean you have to hire a new person. It means give some of your team, I would recommend at least 2 people, so that there's not just like one siloed person making these monolithic decisions that nobody even likes. So get at least 2 people a couple hours a week to think about DevOps and where can they improve, and then try to roll out some of those improvements, so you can go slowly. And then if you start seeing value add, give them 4 hours a week, or whatever the number is. So I would advocate for having a DevOps team that's going to provide value.
If you don't have a team, many shops don't, especially the smaller ones, definitely you want to stand on the shoulders of an existing project, like Lando or DocSolver, whatever.
Yeah.
If you have a specific host like Acme or Champion or whatever you already have, they probably already have a tool that you should start with.
Yeah. Right. That's a super valid point. Like, maybe it doesn't make sense for you guys to be building your own tools, but there are certainly a lot of open source projects out there that you're able to leverage.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, it sounds so good, but I'm thinking, a particular project, you have a team working on it and you see some value, but then where are you 6 months or a year later when that team has broken up and that person's not really responsible for your entire DevOps operation, but they wrote it the first time.
Yep.
And then how that ownership, how you evolve that into a
documentation, so that if 8 months later someone new has to come onto it, the documentation should make sense and be able to get them going on that project. If it can't do that, then you need to iterate on that documentation.
Yeah.
Everything I understand about DevOps is that it is not so much a technology as a conversation. DevOps should encompass the programmers, the QA team, the project managers, and the client in what are your goals. Programmers want to run up an environment fast when they get invested in the project. QA team wants to be able to run their tests in the same environment that the client will see. The client wants to know that their goals are being met. So, it's DevOps is just a technology. So, conversation.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Conversation or process, I think. Yeah.
It's both. It's people, conversation, and process, and tooling.
Yep.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. I've worked for a company called Datadog, and we provide tooling, provide monitoring for the DevOps kind of mindset. And at Datadog, we're a 600-person organization. We've got probably 250 developers. We do not have a DevOps group. We do not have a DevOps person. It is the way we think. It is the way developers all think about operations. Operations all think about developers. And in a lot of kind of more classic organizations, you're going to have a dev team that's focused on building new products and potentially breaking things, but making new features. And operations is there just to make sure that nothing breaks and everything stays the same. So you've got these 2 teams that are opposing each other.
Yeah.
And it should be, DevOps is not just a person you hire or a person with that in their title. It's a way of thinking, a way of communicating, making sure that both developers and operations talk to each other, that they have the same goals in mind. And And even if you're starting with a classic structure already in place, having that executive buy-in, having somebody at the top who's saying, yes, we need to go this way. Okay, yes, you've got opposing goals. Let's work on changing those goals so that you can work together. And we do want to see you work together. We want to see you, yes, not break things, but also bring in new functionality.
Sure.
That's why the teams
So
have to overlap. It's essential that the teams overlap.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have silos and
Right.
competing is just I say this way and you say that way.
And if it's just hiring a person, that person's without that executive sponsorship, you're never going to go.
True.
Rob, I noticed that you guys are wrapping your scripts in Composer.
Mhm.
Let's say you work on a project now, a year from now, your process has changed.
Yeah.
In a project, how are you backporting that? Because we're kind of fighting that internally at my
Yeah.
company, which is we're on our second iteration of our scaffold.
Yeah.
And we're talking about building like a 70 wrapper.
Yeah.
To wrap our tools that we can
Sure.
distribute that with the
Yeah.
tenants. So
Yeah.
like, how are you guys managing that with
Right. Yeah, and I don't have a fantastic answer there, but what I do have as an answer is we built a tool that is somewhat like a package manager. It would be awesome if we could get this in an actual package manager, but we built a tool that will pull down the latest stuff from our scaffold and lay it over the existing project to some success. But it eases the pain of updating from the upstream. And yeah, I mean, I think that that's a valid approach, and that's one that we released as open source. You can check it out on our scaffold. But it's a hard thing. Like, you definitely need to spend a little bit of time, as Andrew knows, updating things in the future and making sure that your projects receive the updates properly.
Lando, can you speak a little bit about how you make that jump from, and you hinted at it, but how you make the jump from the developer environment to the production environment? You said you're not just shipping out the containers generally, but I didn't quite catch what you are doing.
Yeah, so we're just using a PR workflow against GitHub, and we have a GitHub integration with Platform SH, or in the case of Pantheon, we'll put Travis build stuff in the middle of it to build out the assets. So when you push up to GitHub, you push up a feature branch, and that spins up a PR environment. Well, first it runs the test, then it spins up a PR environment. Then QC team kicks in, and you can make sure that the feature does the things it's supposed to do and complete production parity, because Platform Container spun up the PR branch as a containerized copy of the production environment with real data and everything in a protected environment. So that's how we manage that. There are other ways to manage it. So we're basically picking partners that help us with that.
So ostensibly, then the difference, there shouldn't be any difference in the container. Maybe the settings sometimes are different in the final way, but it's really, A, it's done individually, and B, you're using production data when you're building into production.
That's right.
But other than that, it really sort of theoretically ought to be the same.
That's right. If there's a difference in our local container versus the platform container, it will be detected on the PR branch and the PR environment before it goes live.
Cool.
Cool. I think we should probably wrap it up here as we're getting to the time. But thank you for coming out, and let us know if you have any questions.